Hello, my name is Riedel Cronon, and my presentation is called Does the Presidential Assassination in Haiti Indicate a Revolution to Come? On July 7th, 2021, President Moise of Haiti was assassinated by 26 commandos that raided his private home and shot him. They were hired by a Haitian-American doctor who wanted to overthrow the government in his image. In August 1791, a massive slave revolution began in Saint-Domingue. 230 years later, Haiti is still in perpetual conflict. Perhaps the doctor saw himself as a contemporary Toussaint Louverture, attempting to free his country from internal colonialism and corporatism. Massive protests in the pursuit of social justice have turned the decade of 2020 into the age of revolution. 2020 had protests in Kiev, Taiwan, and the United States, and even though they were not demonstrating in solidarity with Haiti, but they were all protesting for new conceptions of democracy, human rights, and citizenship. The colonial history of Haiti has established a disproportionate class structure with no middle. The imbalance between the enslaved and the white masters and overseers was extreme. Haiti had a wave of massive protests because of a constitutional crisis about the tenure of President Moise since his election in 2015. These protests were exacerbated by a constitutional referendum that allowed him to rule by decree as a result of his own irresponsibility. The core intent of the government's reform plan to strengthen the executive branch and affect the presidency so that a small minority in the legislative will not be able to stall the political process. And that's from an article written by George Foriel from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The election was already protested because results were called fraudulent. The protesters accused the government of rigging the election in favor of Mr. Moise, he was a banana exporter that did not have a lot of political experience and was only a friend of the current president. I believe that was the extent of his political experience. And his competitor or running mate accused the government of rigging the election. And then they had to have a re-election. One of the things I wanted to point out is that in this class we read a lot about the Haitian Revolution, and then when we think of revolutions happening, we don't really get to understand the extent of their bloodshed, and we really think that change can't happen without a significant level of carnage. The Haitian Revolution was insanely violent. If you look at the man on the left, he's holding a severed head. And I thought this was important to bring up because I think a lot of times we feel insulated from these kind of events because of our American privilege, and that things like this can't happen to us, but the probability exists even if very small. I like this picture a lot. It has a lot of texture and there's a lot of good details in it to really show a lot about the Haitian Revolution. One of the things you'll notice is that these Haitian revolutionaries in the foreground are covered in red, which I think is supposed to symbolize blood. One of the things you'll also notice is that the Haitian revolutionaries don't have shoes. I pointed out in an assignment earlier in class that the wearing of shoes is usually a good indication of class discrepancy. And the Haitian revolutionaries don't have shoes, and the soldiers have some kind of boot or something. Another good comparison is that on the left you'll see that there's kind of a never-ending snake of imperial soldiers that are just coming through this valley. And then on the right you'll see that there's only about 5 Haitian revolutionaries to fight all of them, which I think shows the just exactly what these kind of the opponent these guerrilla fighters were against, and really shows just their level of commitment to freedom. Here's a good picture that represents the violence of this revolution. These are Haitian revolutionaries hanging a captured French officer. They're also hanging another kind of French officer on the left side. And then even in the back, you can see that there's just gallows that have bodies hanging from them all the way up that hill or mountain. So you can, yeah, just definitely a good example of just the amount of bloodshed that came from the Haitian Revolution. This picture, I think, is a good example of the dissolve of gender roles that came from slavery in the Caribbean. This is some sugar cane being harvested, and as you can see, there's men and women working alongside each other. They're wearing different clothes, but they're still performing the same task. They're still working in the same field together. So I think this picture is just a good representation of that. The next thing is black exoticism. So the exoticism of black women is present even in images of their torture. This woman is drawn in a very Rubenesque or angelic way with her hips and breasts exposed. The presidential assassination is not directly related to any gender issues, but the instability will allow the oppression of sex tourism to persist. And from between love and money, both tourism and remittances represent the major earnings for the state, signifying a continual reliance on former colonial powers and outside forces for economic stability. And then there are also more factors relevant in the assassination. So funding for the assassination came from Worldwide Capital Lending Group, which is an American company. And I went to their website, and it's very strange. It does not look like a website that a typical business would have. It almost looks like a fake website or like a shell company or something. It's very, very strange. And then the two questions I ask are, will the assassination lead to a more significant revolution like 230 years earlier? Because I believe Vincent Oge had tried to stage a coup in Haiti, which was failed, which I think is reminiscent of the Doctor, even though he probably saw himself as the more valiant of the heroes of the revolution. And then the next question I ask is, does the failure of the attempt by two private military contractors to overthrow Venezuela in 2020, which I believe was called Operation Gideon, indicate that the United States may have had a deeper involvement in the Haitian assassination based on Haiti's dependency of an export economy? Because I believe some of the initiatives President Moise wanted to enact were agricultural farming, because most of the population in Haiti is rural, which also might allow them to resist corporatism. And he could have been assassinated to perpetuate that kind of market, or keeping Haiti in that kind of sweatshop market. So anyway, that's my presentation. Oh, or like in Bitter Cane, the Bitter Cane film, to maintain that kind of standard. So that's my presentation, and then here are all my sources. Thank you very much. Have a good day.